All right, today we're diving into a real medical mystery. We're talking about a silent chain reaction, one that's hidden deep inside the shoulder, and it ends in a total, catastrophic failure.
You know, when you think about a muscle tearing, your mind probably jumps to a big event, right? A fall, lifting something way too heavy, some kind of obvious injury. But what if a muscle just gives out for no apparent reason? Well, that is the huge question at the center of this case.
So, let's meet our patient. She's a 73-year-old woman, and one day, out of the blue, her shoulder just goes. We're not talking about a slip on the ice or an accident, nothing. She can't point to a single thing that caused it. All she knows is she has this sudden, intense pain, weakness, and a visible deformity that absolutely wasn't there yesterday.
To figure this out, the doctors had to put on their detective hats. They needed to rewind the clock to look at a long-standing chronic issue to solve this incredibly sudden and really painful new mystery.
And the first big clue? It's from 3 years ago. See, she'd been diagnosed with a massive rotator cuff tear back then, but she said no to surgery. Figured she could live with it. And for 3 years, she did. But that whole time, that old injury was quietly setting the stage for what was about to happen. This sudden, total collapse that finally brought her to the hospital.
And when they examined her, the evidence was, well, it was dramatic. The doctors could literally see a divot, an indentation right at the top of her shoulder where a big chunk of muscle was supposed to be. And then, if they felt lower down, they could actually feel the muscle itself, all bunched up in a ball where it had retracted after tearing completely loose. Okay, so how on earth does a muscle just tear on its own like that? To get it, we've got to take a quick look at the anatomy. It really all comes down to this delicate balancing act between two major players in the shoulder. First up, you've got the rotator cuff. Now, this is a group of 4 smaller muscles, and I want you to think of them like guide wires on a tent pole. Their main job isn't raw power. It's all about precision. They keep the ball of your upper arm bone perfectly centered in that shallow shoulder socket.
And then you've got the deltoid. That's the big, powerful muscle that gives your shoulder that rounded shape. So if the rotator cuff is the stabilizing guide wires, the deltoid is the engine. It's the powerhouse and provides all the brute force you need to actually lift your arm up.
Now, in a healthy shoulder, these two are a perfect team. The rotator cuff guide wires keep everything stable, which lets the deltoid engine do its job and lift the arm nice and smooth. But what happens when those guide wires are torn? That whole balance is just thrown out the window. Suddenly, that powerful deltoid has nothing holding it in check, so it just yanks the arm bone straight up, pulling it way out of position. And that's it. That's where the silent chain reaction starts. For years, every single time this woman lifted her arm, the top of her arm bone was grinding up against the bone at the very tip of her shoulder. This chronic, repetitive friction was just slowly, silently, fraying the deltoid muscle right where it attached, kind of like a rope being sawed over a sharp edge. Until one day, after years and years of this wear and tear, it just snapped.
Now you might be thinking, okay, that makes sense. And you'd think this would happen all the time, right? I mean, massive rotator cuff tears are super common. But here's the crazy part. That final step, the deltoid muscle itself actually rupturing because of it, that is almost unheard of.
So just how rare are we talking? Well, check this out. A huge study looked at over 111,000 shoulder MRIs, specifically searching for this exact 1-2 punch. And the result? They found it in just 0.04% of cases. That is just unbelievably rare.
Yeah, to really put that into perspective for you, surgeons see massive rotator cuff tears all the time. It's a bread and butter problem for them. But to see one that has gone on to cause a complete deltoid rupture, for many surgeons, that's something they might see only once in their entire career. It's that rare.
So, faced with this extremely rare, and let's not forget incredibly painful injury, the patient decided to go for surgery. And the goal was pretty straightforward: repair that newly torn deltoid muscle.
Once they got into the operating room, the surgeons confirmed everything they suspected, and then some. The MRI had shown that the front part of the deltoid was torn, sure, but when they could actually see it with their own eyes, they realized the middle part was torn too. The damage was even worse than the scans had suggested. And that old rotator cuff tear, yep, just as they thought, so scarred down and retracted, there was just no way to repair it.
So the repair itself was this really meticulous 4-step process. First, they had to free up that torn and retracted muscle. Then, they secured it with some seriously strong sutures. After that, they actually drilled tiny holes in the bone to reattach those sutures.
And for a final bit of insurance, they reinforced the whole thing by tying the sutures over a tiny metal plate, which just helps spread the load and stop the stitches from tearing through the bone.
All right, so after that really precise repair, the big question is, how did she do? What was the outcome a year later? And the answer is, well, it's actually a fascinating lesson in how we define what success even means after a surgery like this. A year down the road, the results were a little surprising. On the one hand, her pain was minimal. I mean, that's a huge improvement, a massive win. But on the other hand, when it came to her overall shoulder function, it was described as grossly unchanged.
And hearing that, you might immediately think, wait, unchanged? So it was a failure, right? If her function didn't get any better, what was even the point of the whole operation?
But see, that's missing the real goal here. The surgery was never going to fix that old, irreparable rotator cuff tear. That ship had sailed. The whole point was to fix the new injury, the one that was causing her all that awful pain. And when you look at it that way, it was a total success. That severe, constant pain was gone. All she had left was a little bit of discomfort when she pushed her shoulder to the absolute limit. And that's why this one case tells such a big story. It's a perfect example of how a chronic, long-term problem can just be ticking away in the background, setting the stage for a sudden disaster. But it also kind of redefines what a win can look like in medicine. For this patient, success wasn't about getting back to perfect, 100% function. Success was about ending her pain. And that right there was a life-changing victory for her.
This whole silent chain reaction is just such a powerful reminder of the body's super intricate and often totally invisible connections. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other kinds of domino effects are happening inside all of us right now, just waiting for that one final piece to fall? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown.